Welcome to Stories for Action, Activators series. Today is part 2 in our conversation with the Montana Environmental Information Center. MEIC is a nonprofit organization that has been Montana's environmental watchdog for over 45 years. Through public education and speaking up for environmental policy, they work to ensure clean air and water for Montanans. We're very excited to have with us today Brian Fady. He's MEIC's Clean Energy Program Director. Brian has a master's degree in environmental policy with a focus on renewable energy from the University of Michigan, and his current work puts him at the center of clean energy policy in Montana. Thank you so much for being with us today, Brian.
Thanks for having me.
And can you tell us a little bit about the focus of your work at MEIC?
What I focus on a lot and what our organization has been focusing on a lot in recent years has been, trying to transition Montana off of fossil fuels and onto clean energy, both for consumption here in state, but also to export to surrounding states. The way the electric grid kind of works is we mainly send our energy westward to the coastal states, Washington State, Oregon, a little bit of Idaho. Right now, they have been buying a lot of our coal energy, but the customers there, they are looking to move to clean energy in each of those states. And so we're just trying to accelerate that transition so that we can continue producing energy and have it be clean and also be producing jobs and tax revenue for the state.
And we're seeing around the world cities and states and even countries who are pledging to be 100% renewable energy by a certain date. Can you speak to some of the work that you've done with cities in Montana that have pledged to reach this goal by 2030?
Yeah, this is, I think, pretty interesting. So in the last year, you've had the city and county of Missoula, as well as the city of Helena and the mayor of Bozeman, all set goals for their communities of reaching 100% clean electricity by 2030. All of these jurisdictions are entirely, or at least almost entirely, Northwestern Energy customers. In the electric world, the utilities kind of have their own geographic service territories, and they have monopolies within it. That's just the way it works. If you live in Helena or Bozeman, you have to be a Northwestern customer. That's just how it is. And as of the last number of years, I'd say there's been a lot of frustration amongst people within these cities and across Montana with Northwestern, and that they've been going down a path of more fossil fuel energy, and they've really been fighting against doing more renewable energy. We looked above the chain of command in sort of the energy world at who's making decisions for our energy future. You start at the federal level. You have the Trump administration right now. They are not doing anything for clean energy. In fact, they're taking us backward, trying to do more fossil fuel, trying to prop up the coal industry. You go a level down to the state level. We lobby at the state legislature. I can tell you that body is trying to take us backward as well. They want to do more fossil fuel. They've been also, unfortunately, a little unhelpful on the clean energy side. So we started thinking, what can we do at the local level in our cities and counties? We looked around the country for examples, and at the time there was something like 75 cities that had passed these types of goals for themselves, reaching 100% clean energy by a certain year. And we thought we could do that here. One of the motivations was it would be a clear expression of where people within the city want to go, what direction they want to go with our energy future. We drew, at least in Helena, a lot of inspiration from the state of Utah, where about 2 years ago, they went through a similar process. They had like 6 or 7 cities and counties, and some of pretty significant size, Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County, which has a tremendous population. They all set similar goals, 100% by 2030. And that kicked off a collaborative effort between their cities and their big utility there, a company called Rocky Mountain Power. And long story short, they ended up getting a bill passed at their legislature when their next session came up, and it unlocked some new policy options for how these cities can reach the 100% goal that they've set for themselves. And that was a bill that they got through their legislature. You know, they have a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate and a Republican governor, and yet they got a bill passed that was pro-clean energy and really framed a lot around climate change. And I think that was from talking with, you know, advocates down there. I think a lot of that was because they had the cities behind one bill, the utilities behind the same bill, some of the clean energy advocates, all, you know, everybody was behind the same bill. And that's not to say everyone agreed with everything throughout the entire process, but they were able to get something through, and they passed it with overwhelming votes, and the governor signed it. And now they're going through that process of trying to get more clean energy online. That is, at least again in Helena, I think a lot of us are hoping we can at least try to go down a similar path. The parties involved here, you know, clean energy advocates, the cities to some extent, and the utility are not necessarily on the same page right now, but hopefully this process, there can be some good communication, some good collaboration. We're at the very beginning, but we're hopeful that, you know, we might be able to go down a similar path.
And from your work that you've been involved with yourself, as well as what you witnessed in Utah's legislation, can you speak to some of the talking points around the clean energy transition that speak to both political parties and really bridge those divides?
Well, I start with the utility and what a lot of people perceive to be their motivations. I mean, they're a for-profit entity, is what Northwestern is. That's their structure. And so they're interested in making revenue for themselves and their shareholders. And on our side, you know, we want more clean energy. And it turns out if you want to do that, you have to build new clean energy. You know, you have to build wind facilities and solar facilities. And the cost of those facilities have come down dramatically. It's what really allows this transition to take place. I mean, the latest power plant in Montana to come online was a wind facility called the South Peak Wind Farm. It's kind of east of Great Falls. The cost of that is $22 per megawatt hour. And the unit doesn't really, you know, it's $22 for a unit of energy. You compare that to the cost of Colstrip, the coal-fired power plant in eastern Montana, and for Northwestern customers, it's $74. So you have, you know, a new wind facility, $22, this old coal plant, $74. Other wind contracts and solar contracts, particularly around the West, are coming in at similar, you know, sub $30 costs. So, you know, we really think we can make this transition to clean energy, save ratepayers money, also reduce emissions. And, you know, the utility, what they're most interested in, they make most of their money when they build new projects. Transmission lines, power plants, the big capital intensive stuff is where they make their biggest profits. And no one's saying that they can't make any money off of building these things. I mean, that's just the system that we're in. They'll be able to make some money off of building new wind and solar, and we will be happily there, you know, supporting getting approval for new wind and solar projects that gets clean energy online and hopefully meets the utilities' incentives as well.
And because people in other locations can relate to a lot of these issues of running into roadblocks for pushing clean energy forward, I want to speak to some of the talking points so that viewers can be better educated on these issues. So what do you say to the argument of jobs that the coal industry generates versus renewable energy?
Well, we, MEIC specifically, but also the environmental community a little bit more broadly, we've been fighting for transition funding for years now. And I think it's safe to say that the transition funding that has already been secured for Colstrip specifically, that was secured by environmental advocates in Washington State and in Idaho. I mean, $10 million from Puget Sound Energy, one of the Colstrip co-owners, was secured because environmental advocates in that state in a specific proceeding was able to secure it. And same with one of the other co-owners, a company called Avista that kind of serves northern Idaho and Spokane. They had another proceeding, and environmental advocates there were able to secure, I think 4.5 million was the amount there. We've been trying to get that out of Northwestern in a couple of different proceedings so far to get transition funding for the community. We think all the coal strip co-owners should put in funding for that. And then the community has a very important role to play, perhaps the most important role to play, to think about, the future of the community, the jobs they would like to see, the jobs they would like for the workers to have. The funding so far, there hasn't been a ton of restrictions placed on it so far, and I think we'd like to continue to see that so that the community can decide how they want to spend that money. In addition to that, trying to get more renewable energy jobs in that region. The transmission line that runs from that power plant out to the West Coast that currently sends coal energy can be entirely repurposed to send renewable energy over to those customers on the West Coast. And that's what those customers want over there. There's very good wind resource potential in that part of Montana. I know there's a very large wind project that is moving ahead right now, with the permitting process to get all their ducks in a row so that when they get a contract with the utility, they're ready to go and can start building and operating that. That's going to bring jobs to the area. It's going to bring new tax revenue to the area. Nobody can promise that it's going to be a one-to-one or the exact same, but we're trying to get new jobs and new revenue and transition funding.
And as Montana is a northern state with long summer daylight hours, but very short winter days, what do you say to the argument that your state may not be conducive to generating a sufficient amount of renewable energy, both with solar and wind?
Yeah, well, on the wind side specifically, we have the number 2 wind energy potential in the country of all states. Texas is number 1. We got the number 2 spot. So we're fantastic in wind. And in particular, our wind is best suited to sell to those customers on the West Coast. They have what's called winter peaking energy demand. Their highest demand hours are in the winter. And our wind in Montana blows strongest in the winter. And so there's a nice match there. There's a lot of value when you have that match of high demand and high production of the wind. On the solar side, we actually do have pretty good solar potential. You don't necessarily want, like in the desert Southwest, which has obviously a tremendous solar capacity and resource potential. The solar panels, if they get too hot, they actually do start losing a little bit of efficiency. And so you kind of want a bit of a more moderate temperature to get maximum output of the panels. And so our more moderate temperature here in Montana compared to the desert Southwest is actually a little bit of an advantage as well. So, and there are certainly companies that are looking to do large scale, multi-100 megawatt solar projects in Montana right now.
And from a layman's perspective, is there a way to bank that energy generated, such as from those long summer daylight hours or peak wind times?
Yeah, well, what's called battery energy storage is really going to be key when we start to get to higher percentages of renewable energy on the grid. There's something called a pumped hydroelectric energy storage facility. They're looking to get a contract now. It's in central Montana called the Gordon Butte Project, 400 megawatts in size, which is a very large facility. It's basically a way of storing energy where you have water at 2 elevations, one at a reservoir at a higher elevation at the kind of the top of the hill, and one at a lower elevation at the bottom of the hill. You connect the two with a pipe. And so you can send water downhill through a turbine in the middle to generate electricity when you need it. And then when you don't need it, you just pipe it back uphill to the upper reservoir so that it's ready to go when you need it later. And you usually would do that overnight when energy demand is low. So that's a large battery project that is really ready to go here in Montana once they can get a contract. And then of course, lithium ion batteries. Your cell phone, the same basic technology in there has evolved very quickly for the electric grid. And so now you're having multi-100 megawatt lithium ion battery energy storage projects in the United States, around the world. And that's a way you can store that excess solar or wind energy and release it on demand later.
That's very cool and interesting to hear about the technological advancements that have been made on that front. And you've spoken to the importance of political parties working together to arrive at solutions. Can you give us a specific example in your own work where divided groups have come together to move things forward?
One big vote that happened in Montana late last year, late 2019, was about rooftop solar and how do we treat rooftop solar customers. And a lot of last year there was this whole case at the Public Service Commission. Northwestern really wanted to put on these new fees to any rooftop solar customer. They wanted to decrease the compensation that people get when they put excess energy from their rooftop system onto the grid. Rooftop solar is an interesting scenario. You get a lot more crossover amongst kind of more left-leaning individuals and right-leaning individuals. The folks on the right, the more conservative end, there's a lot of natural allies there where they really feel and they understand the values behind rooftop solar, this idea that you're generating your own electricity. It's a very sort of self-reliance kind of feeling. A lot of them don't necessarily like this whole monopoly utility setup that we got where there's no competition. You can only get it from one utility wherever you live. And so they like the idea, well, I'm going to sort of take some of that power back and generate my own electricity. That energy freedom, energy independence is a real thing. And so I think you saw last year with the Public Service Commission issue there, you had people more traditionally on the left and more traditionally on the right that were saying, hey, don't harm rooftop solar here. Don't do what the utility is trying to get you to do. And we ended up winning that. It was a unanimous vote by the commissioners to reject Northwestern's request. And now rooftop solar is allowed to flourish again. It is something that, we're hopeful in the future that as federal government action and these stimulus packages are happening, that they're going to be looking to clean energy as ways to get people back to work. You're saving people money in the process. It's all the things that, these economic stimuluses are trying to accomplish. Clean energy can do that. There are hundreds and thousands of megawatts of wind and solar projects in Montana and around the country that are, quote unquote, shovel ready. I mean, they've got all the siting done. They're ready to go if the policy is there.
That's very promising and a lot of potential there if the right policies are put into motion. And before we wrap up, do you have a call to action for viewers who would also want to see more renewable energy in their area?
This might be a little self-serving, but I'll do a plug that look for your local environmental organization and join up, become a member if you can, or get on their listservs to find out what's going on. I mean, unfortunately, it's kind of in the energy world and, with these utility commissions, public service commissions, they're just unfortunately wonky and technical discussions going on, but a lot of times the local environmental groups, they have the capacity to read what's happening, translate it so that folks can understand, let you know when's the time to jump in, give you information about what you can say, what you can do. So I would encourage folks to look for those.
And on that note, can you let folks know where they can follow your work and get involved with MEIC?
Yeah, our website, meic.org. We are a membership-based organization, so we'd love to have you.
Thank you so much for your time today, Brian, and offering us an insider's perspective on the push for renewable energy, and also giving us great background so that as consumers and as voters, we can stay well informed on the decisions that directly affect us, and that we are able to speak up for the right things. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.